One lap. One touch. One team imploding in the spotlight. The night McLaren were crowned champions turned into a night of accusation and silence. Piastri's calm exterior cracked, his voice raw, his faith broken. And behind every camera flash, a question burned: has McLaren lost control of its own creation? The contact itself was so slight that to the untrained eye it barely registered. No sparks, no shattered carbon, no desperate corrections on the steering wheel. Yet in those few inches of misjudged space lay the seed of McLaren's biggest internal crisis in years. Piastri's race had been methodical from the start: clean getaway, steady pace, disciplined awareness. Norris's start, by contrast, was electric. Within seconds he had surged past Antonelli, aiming straight for the inside of turn 3. It was the kind of instinctive move that defines a driver's career: bold, fast, uncompromising. But when he brushed Verstappen's Red Bull, the chain reaction was immediate. The Ferrari red tail in front twitched, the McLaren behind veered right, and in a heartbeat, orange met orange. For the stewards, it was open and shut. A racing incident, no penalty required. In the bureaucratic language of Formula One, the matter was closed. But inside McLaren, the wound remained raw. Because this was not just any collision, it was a breach of something sacred, the _papaya rule _, the internal code that both drivers had been sworn to uphold. Race hard, race fair, but never hit your teammate. That was the creed on which McLaren's resurgence had been built. It was the code that had allowed two hungry young drivers to coexist without implosion. And now, before the eyes of the world, that code had been broken. The radio exchange that followed revealed more than frustration, it revealed truth. Piastri's voice, usually measured to the point of monotony, carried a tight edge of disbelief. "That was not very team-like," he said. When his engineer, Tom Stallard, replied that Norris had to avoid Verstappen, Piastri's composure cracked. If avoiding another car means hitting your teammate, that is a pretty bad job avoiding. It was not the content that stung McLaren, it was the tone. For the first time since his debut, Oscar Piastri had spoken against the team's judgment. For the men and women on his side of the garage, it was the sound of a driver losing faith in the system that had shaped him. Andrea Stella, ever the voice of calm, later called the situation complex. But to those who lived it, it was simple. Piastri believed that fairness had been compromised. He felt that Norris, as the team's British star in the face of McLaren's revival, was afforded leniency he himself could not expect. It was a perception, not a fact, but perception is currency in Formula One. Once a driver starts believing that equality inside the garage is negotiable, the delicate balance that holds a team together begins to slip. Engineers whisper, mechanics choose sides, and a single misunderstanding becomes an atmosphere. By the time Piastri crossed the finish line, the real damage had already been done. This was not the first time tension had simmered beneath McLaren's glossy surface. Earlier that season in Monza, Piastri had been ordered to give back position after a slow pit stop, told it was to restore the order that should have been. He complied, but his answer over the radio, "I thought a slow stop was part of racing," lingered long after the checkered flag. To him, Singapore was not an isolated case, it was confirmation of a pattern. A pattern where every small incident seemed to tilt the balance of fairness just slightly, always in the same direction. He had accepted it once. He would not accept it again. What made this moment explosive was not aggression, but accumulation. The slow buildup of silent doubts, the small inconsistencies brushed aside in the name of unity. McLaren had spent 2 years crafting a culture of openness, of equality, of modernity. But the truth of Formula One is that equality and ambition are natural enemies. The faster both drivers became, the narrower the space for peace. At turn 3 in Singapore, they finally ran out of space, both on track and in trust. And in that lies the real problem. It was never about who was right or wrong in that corner. It was about what that corner revealed, that McLaren's greatest strength, the partnership between two future world champions, had turned into its most volatile variable. The team could fix wings, analyze data, and publish statements. But how do you repair belief once it has cracked? How do you convince a driver who thinks the system is tilted that he is still being treated equally? Those were the questions that no post-race debrief could answer. Every Formula One conflict begins long before the lights go out. The seeds of tension are sown in design meetings, in simulations, and in the small compromises made between engineering logic and driver instinct. McLaren's internal storm in Singapore was no different. It was born not in the heat of Turn 3, but in the cold precision of the McLaren, a car so finely balanced, so demanding of perfection, that it magnifies the smallest human difference. What unfolded that night was not merely a clash of egos, but a collision of philosophies, each one amplified by the machinery that carried it. The McLaren is, by all accounts, a masterpiece of modern design. Conceived under Rob Marshall's technical leadership, it represents the purest expression of McLaren's transformation from midfield survivor to dominant force. Every line of carbon, every aerodynamic contour, serves one purpose: efficiency. But in that pursuit of efficiency, the car became a paradox extraordinary when driven at the edge, but unpredictable for those who stray even slightly beyond it. The front suspension, celebrated for its aerodynamic freedom, also created a nervous front end on bumpy street circuits like Marina Bay. The car could bite as easily as it could sing. And on a night when both drivers fought for the same apex, that sharpness became fatal. Lando Norris thrives on instability. He uses it as a weapon, dancing with the car rather than controlling it, trusting his reflexes more than his telemetry. He is at his fastest when the car is on the verge of chaos, when the rear threatens to slide and the nose twitches with nervous energy. Oscar Piastri, by contrast, is a creature of precision. He prefers predictability, rhythm, the perfect repeatable corner. In identical machinery, their strengths diverge in opposite directions. McLaren's engineers had spent months walking that tightrope, tuning the car to sit between two driving styles that almost refused to coexist. In Singapore, the rope finally snapped. The Turn 3 sequence told the story in pure physics. Norris, attacking from the inside, carried more steering angle into the corner, forcing the loaded front left suspension to compress and oscillate on the circuit's rough surface. Verstappen's Red Bull ahead slowed more abruptly than expected, forcing Norris to jink left to avoid contact. In a car with a more compliant front geometry, that move might have been absorbed. But the McLaren, with its ultra-stiff setup and sensitive suspension, responded with a snap. It drifted outward by just a few inches, enough to meet the side of Piastri's car. From an engineering perspective, it was a matter of geometry, grip, and timing. From a human one, it was a test of trust that neither driver passed unscathed. Inside the garage, the engineers dissected the data as they always do, without emotion. The graphs showed minimal contact force, no lasting mechanical damage, no aerodynamic imbalance. But what the sensors could not record was the emotional imbalance now spreading through the team. To the engineering staff, the incident was a problem to be solved. To the drivers, it was a question of fairness. When the telemetry printouts became part of the post-race debrief, one engineer reportedly called the contact inevitable given the setup variance. It was meant as technical observation. Piastri took it as confirmation that the team had chosen to understand the car rather than the driver. Andrea Stella faced a dilemma that every technical leader eventually encounters: how to defend science without undermining emotion. His words after the race were calm and deliberate: "We will review analytically and come back stronger." But those who know him understood the weight behind them. Stella, an engineer by formation and a psychologist by necessity, could see that the car was no longer just a machine, it had become a mirror. It reflected the differences between his drivers, the hierarchy within his team, and the fragility of unity built on performance. Singapore exposed that mirror to the world, and what it revealed was uncomfortable. When the checkered flag waved under the dazzling lights of Marina Bay, McLaren's story should have been one of unbroken glory. The team had just sealed its second consecutive Constructors' Championship, a moment that, in any other season, would have represented the pinnacle of modern success. Mechanics cheered, champagne was readied, photographers crowded the pit lane. But inside the garage, celebration felt hollow. The smiles were tight, the applause delayed. The air was heavy with something far colder than tropical humidity: discomfort. A sense that the team had won everything except peace. The first tremor came moments after the finish. Zak Brown's voice echoed through the radio channels, upbeat and rehearsed. "Fantastic job, team. Two-time Constructors' Champions. "Well done, Lando." "Well done, Oscar." The response from Norris was instant gratitude, relief, the voice of a man still buzzing with adrenaline. From Piastri, there was silence. Seconds passed. Engineers glanced at each other. Then the line went dead. Somewhere in that silence, the camera caught him, visor still down, jaw set, expression unreadable. It was a small act, almost imperceptible, yet it rippled through the paddock like a thunderclap. For the first time, Oscar Piastri had disconnected, literally and symbolically, from the voice of McLaren. The images that followed did little to calm speculation. When Norris climbed to the podium, Piastri was nowhere to be seen. The explanation came swiftly: post-race interviews, sponsored duties, normal protocol, yet nobody truly believed it. The photo that captured McLaren's historic triumph told its own story. On one side of the frame, Norris raised his trophy, surrounded by cheers. On the other, a space stood empty where his teammate should have been. In the theater of Formula One, absence speaks louder than any speech. Overnight, the footage spread across the world. Clips of Piastri's radio messages went viral, translated, replayed, and analyzed to exhaustion. The British press described it as the first crack in the papaya wall. Australian media went further, calling it a mutiny wrapped in silence. On social media, the video of Piastri switching off his radio mid-congratulation became instant folklore. Memes flooded timelines, pundits debated whether this was immaturity or defiance. Yet behind the noise, a more serious discussion was taking place among those who understood the sport. Formula One history is littered with these moments, a single gesture that signals the end of innocence. Piastri's silence had joined that lineage. McLaren's leadership moved quickly into control mode. Andrea Stella, measured as ever, delivered a calm statement in front of the cameras. "We will review carefully. We will come back stronger, as we always do." His tone was smooth, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. Zach Brown, ever the diplomat, smiled for the microphones and insisted that everything is fine between the boys. But even as he spoke, his words lacked conviction. You cannot rebuild trust with press quotes. You rebuild it with consistency, and consistency was precisely what Piastri felt had been lost. The media, ever hungry for drama, framed the story as a clash of values rather than personalities. Norris, the British poster boy, fiery, instinctive, adored. Piastri, the quiet outsider, clinical, relentless, principled. Together, they had brought McLaren to greatness. Now they stood on opposite sides of a moral divide. It was not about who was faster, it was about who was fairer. Each represented a different vision of what McLaren should be. To British fans, the story carried uncomfortable echoes of Hamilton and Alonso in 2007, another year when brilliance and equality had collided under the same roof. Piastri's transformation in the days that followed was subtle but unmistakable. The polite, reserved young man who had entered Formula One with a calm smile began to speak with new authority. In interviews, he was controlled yet firm, choosing every word with surgical precision. "We have to be consistent in how we apply our rules," he said to one reporter, his tone neutral but unyielding. It was the language of a driver no longer content to be managed, but ready to lead even if that meant confrontation. For those inside McLaren, it was a warning. Oscar Piastri had found his voice, and he intended to use it. For Norris, the position was equally uncomfortable. He had done nothing malicious, no deliberate shove, no reckless gamble, yet he found himself cast as the privileged favorite. The golden child turned symbol of favoritism. It was an image he neither deserved nor wanted, yet it clung to him. In his interviews, he spoke with honesty. "It was tight, I had to avoid Max, these things happen." But the tone was weary. He understood that perception, once formed, rarely yields to logic. And the perception now was clear: one driver felt betrayed, and the other was being protected. Whether true or not no longer mattered. In Formula One, the story becomes the reality once the world believes it. By the time the team left Singapore, the fracture had deepened beyond repair for the weekend. Inside McLaren's traveling motorhome, there was no shouting, no confrontation, just distance. Conversations were shorter, meetings quieter. The walls that once echoed with laughter and camaraderie now felt padded with caution. What had once been a partnership defined by equality had turned into one defined by tension. The sport's oldest pattern had returned: two world-class drivers, one team, and an invisible line drawn between them.